We find that when we are trying to understand and follow the teaching of Sri Ramana Maharshi, we come immediately with the problem of dealing with the mind and trying to understand if the mind is to be dealt with or to be left alone in our quest for the revelation and realization of the self. But one thing, if we study properly and listen to those who lived with Bhagavan, we will find that he was the essence of tradition. And being the essence of tradition, he often quoted from the works of the Bhagavad Gita, Adi Shankaracharya, even the Bible. For even from the Bible, he quoted a definition of mukti as coming from the 46th Psalm, which is, "Be still and know that I am God." We should not just give credence to the understanding that yes, we should be still and we should still our mind, but the knowledge, the knowing that he has talked about is essential for us. So we find in the Narada Bhakti Sutras, and Sutra 26, 27, and 28, very important instruction which is given to us from there. And in a commentary by Swami Tagishananda, who was a great saint of the Ramakrishna order, he says in his commentary this, that Adi Shankaracharya emphasizes the function of the intellect in attaining the highest realization and subordinates other functions to it. In fact, all of the darshanas promise mukti or liberation only to those who have a clear vision of the truth. Sri Anandamoy Ma used to always say that what was needed was a change of an angle of vision, to look properly, to see the truth and not see the world as complete illusion and rubbish, but to see the truth within it. Jesus spoke of this same thing where he said, "Thou shalt know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." So what are we seeking, and how are we to find truth with a mind that is devious and perceives incorrectly? Why, it's very obvious that the saints all point us to the one problem which we find, are habits of the mind. If we change our habits and we change that will change our perception. In fact, the great Swami Shivananda of Rishikesh said, if you even want to change your fate, simply change your habits. But Swami Tadgishayananda goes on to say, the Buddha makes right understanding the first of his noble eightfold path, and the Jains include right knowledge in their triple panacea for the cure of samsara, or suffering. So we find that what we're looking for is right understanding, and obviously we must use the mind and application of its purity and its perceptionness not to be tainted and drawn away from the truth, mainly by its habit of avarice, anger, greed, and all the foibles of selfishness and wrong action, which is prompted by unskillful thoughts. He goes on to say that Saint Teresa herself harps on the supreme need for recollecting the mind, recollecting the scattered thoughts and concentrating the intellect on the business at hand, the business of everyday awareness. Obviously, if we're trying to seek God, amongst our activities and obligations and duties in the world, we should seek awareness of that divine nature within that which is before us in the material world. And so therefore, we find, surely there is no sense in believing that one should leave one's brains behind, and then immediately that will turn one towards God. It is indeed true that all mental powers must be transcended before realizing the highest. This is what the Vedas speak about, transcending the mind. But first, as Sri Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, the mind must be controlled. The habits must be controlled. The input from the world must be controlled. The soul must indeed outstrip its instruments in its fight towards God, especially during the last stages of the quest, where it is a fight of the alone to the alone. This is probably the most important thing that we find in spiritual life, that ultimately we find ourselves alone before God. But in the effort and in the acquisition of true and right understanding, which is attained by clear vision, clear aptitude, a sense of peace comes, a sense of joy comes. And in this sense of joy, we find that we are not lonely, we are definitely apart, set apart from the world. But we are alone with that one. So seeking that one thing, we find that the saints tell us, therefore it is always advantageous to have a reasonable idea of God to begin with. Great saints used to always say, before you spiritualize your life, you should normalize it. Try to become tranquil and forgiving and compassionate in your dealings with man, and thus you'll be receptive for that compassion to come to you and to come from us from on high. We should not take care to mistake this for mere dry intellectualism. As Narada Deva himself points out later in Sutra 74 of the Narada Bhakti Sutras, the aspirant should not take delight in vain argumentations and scholastic disputations for their own sake. The proper place for reason is provided for in spiritual practice by the insistence on reflection or manana. True dharma, true righteousness comes from a reflective mind. For a reflective mind lays the groundwork for a receptive heart. So we should go forth and try to understand more and more in the days to come of Narada and the Bhakti Sutras, to try to understand if we're seeking devotion and love of God, the first thing we must do is try to understand God. Yes, understand God even with an imperfect mind and a faulty intellect, but to apply it and to pray for clarity and insight, that we may clean our own house first and then be able to open the door for divine providence to come and fill our life with that joy that will take away all loneliness and that will take away all need. And truly then the alone will find peace in the alone. Hari Om.